Welcome to my channel, The Binge Eating Therapist. I'm Sarah, former binge eater turned psychotherapist, and my mission is to use this space to bring content to you to help you understand your struggle with food and break free from binge eating. And today's video is an interview with Ronni Robinson. Now, I love interviewing people who have recovered from binge eating. I think their stories bring a lot of hope to people still struggling. And also I think there's a lot we can learn from hearing other people's stories. And she struggled for 3 decades. So I know some people who've been struggling with this for a long time. You know, you see all these young people on Instagram talking about how they recovered from binge eating. And for you, it's been tens of years of this. I think Ronnie's story offers a lot of hope and a lot of insight into how you might think about recovery after such a long period of time. So I'd been following Ronni on Instagram for a couple of years, I think. So when I saw she had released a book in August, I went and bought it, read it, loved it, and she very kindly agreed to be interviewed today. So if you're interested in knowing more about Ronnie's story, you can follow her on Instagram or buy her book, and I'll pop her details below this video. So I got a lot out of this interview, and I hope you do too. Hi, Ronni.
Hi, Sarah. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this today. I'm really excited to have you on.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for having me.
No problem. Well, I've been following you on Instagram for a while. I was following you before your book came out. And I think what I really notice about your posts is I read your posts and everything to me is so resonant. I read it and I'm just like, that is so true, that is so true, that is so true. So when I saw your book had come out, I thought, well, this is someone I really like what she has to say. So I went and bought it.
Oh, thank you.
No worries. It's called Out of the Pantry and it's your memoir. And I imagine it was probably quite tough to write about some of this stuff.
Yeah. For a very long time, I was really ashamed and embarrassed about the eating disorder, as well as I had also mentioned there, I was in an abusive relationship, and it was really embarrassing to show and admit in there that how somebody treated me and how I let that happen. And I basically enabled that to happen. And it's just a lot of shame. I mean, that whole book is not my, what I felt was my proudest moments, in my life, but I still put it out there just to help, just kind of pay it forward. And if somebody else reads it and says, oh my gosh, that was me. And, maybe realizes a problem that they can also get help from, that they would know they weren't alone.
Well, I think one of the things that actually, I think really struck me about your story was it was a long time, and I think this is true for a lot of people who struggle with binge eating or overeating. It was a long time before you realized, hang on, like this is an eating disorder, right? Because at the time, what was it you thought was going on?
To be honest, I just thought it was me. Then that was how I was, and not to put it so gross like this, I just thought I was a pig, and that I ate tons of food. It wasn't anything I ever told anybody, so I could, didn't say, hey, do you eat huge quantities of food when nobody's around? It wasn't something that I spoke about. It was sort of my normal from when I was 9 years old and lasted for like 30 years. So yeah, it was just my normal. And I'd heard of anorexia and I heard of bulimia. I certainly wasn't starving myself. And though I tried throwing up, I was never able to. So I wasn't bulimic. And I was just like, okay, this is just me. And I love stuffing my face with tons of food. And I had this need to do it that I could never explain, but that was just me. And it never crossed my mind that it was an eating disorder. That was just my normal that I had known since childhood.
Yeah. Well, 9 years old, that's so young. So like you'd never known, I suppose, what a healthy relationship with food felt like.
Right.
And we hear so often about how binge eating starts as a result of dieting, like as a response to deprivation. So at 9 years old, it wasn't about dieting for you, though, was it? Like there was other things going on?
No, it wasn't about dieting at all. I didn't know from dieting. I was, a 9-year-old kid. I was a tomboy. I was playing sports. I had friends. I did well in school. There was the compulsive overeating and the binging started with sort of twofold kind of trauma from my past. One is that my house was very the complete opposite of warm and fuzzy. It was kind of cool. Nobody. I have an older brother. None of us, my parents and my brother and I, none of us were close. There was no expression of love. There was no action of love. I knew my parents loved me. That wasn't the question, but it wasn't shown. There was, like I said, there was no warm and fuzzy. There was no family traditions and things we all did together ever. There wasn't like, oh, you know what, you look like you're kind of sad. Do you want to talk about that? Or, tell me about your day in a more than just surfacey kind of way. So that was one thing, was that I didn't know it, of course, at the time until I went to therapy when I was 40. And the other thing is that my mother hid cookies from me. She was a Depression era kid, and she went shopping every Friday, and whatever she bought had to last until the following Friday. And without talking to me about it, without saying, you know what, Ronnie G, you're kind of having a lot of these cookies and they need to last, or I'm a little concerned, or, there was no sit down discussion. She just hid the cookies from me one day, and I asked her about it, and she shirked it off, and she never explained anything. And also in my house, my father was very domineering. He had a bad temper, and he was the kind of person who never did anything wrong. He never said anything wrong. So if him and my mother would fight and argue, my mother inevitably ended up backing down, because my father was impossible. And no matter what you said or what you did, he didn't do anything wrong. So what I guess I just learned from that, kind of got to me through osmosis, was, when you ask somebody a question or you sort of confront them, like I did, saying, Mom, did you hide the cookies? And she said, I don't know what you're talking about. It was my nature to be like, oh, okay, much like she did with my father, she kind of backed down. So I kind of learned from a young age, from her actions, that it makes no point in questioning things. So just go along with it. And then that's what ended up with me starting to take trips around to the supermarket, was right around the corner, and starting to spend my allowance and, birthday money and stuff, getting food and sneaking it and eating it when nobody was home.
Yeah. And I think we often think about trauma in childhood as being abuse or someone deliberately trying to hurt you. But actually,
Right.
What I really got from your story was a sense of just not feeling cherished, not being allowed to talk about your feelings. And that impact on a child has a traumatic effect. I don't know if the word trauma jars with you, or whether it's something you would use.
Yeah, you know what? I didn't know it at the time. To me, that was my house, and that's how we lived, and that was normal. I didn't know, like I said, until I went to therapy, that not only just because of my household that I didn't get the love and feel cherished, is a great word that you used. I didn't know that was my normal life. And then the therapist is the one who helped me, connect these dots, that no, I didn't feel loved and cherished. And it wasn't a warm, inviting place. And it wasn't a safe, you can say anything and we're going to support you kind of place. And I didn't realize until therapy that this was traumatic for me. This was trauma. Not, thank God, nobody was beating me or doing anything horrible to me. And then I also know that they were doing the best that they can. Nothing was malicious. Nothing was on purpose. They weren't like, ha, 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 let's hide our love from Ronnie, It was not some master plan. My parents were doing, my mom especially was doing the best she had with whatever tools she had. She didn't mean to hurt me, but it was very traumatic for me.
Mm-hmm. And it seemed from really young, there was a sense around, there's some guilt, some shame around your eating, and the secrecy starts, right? The hiding food. You talk about, you paint a really vivid picture actually of what it's really like to live with that kind of compulsive eating monster, if you like, on your back. And when you talked about being in sort of social situations and like all you could think about was the food, that really resonated with me. I can remember being out with people and just not feeling at all engaged in the conversation because I'm wondering about the food on the table and is it okay to have a bit more, and knowing I want some more, and that fight in my head.
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah. And I feel horrible about that. And that was something that was another thing that I was embarrassed when my friends read it, was like, okay, you know, all these people who I did socialize with, I liked you and I considered you my friend, but I was more interested in eating than I was in talking to you. And while we were talking, you know, I was sitting there thinking, okay, what can I say so I can walk away? And what's over there and who's over there? Because I don't want the same people who were there the first time, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It was all this strategy. And then where can I go eat it so that nobody sees me eating it? Like, you know, just platefuls of food, like, oh God, yeah. And that was my main, you know, we would be invited somewhere and I'd be like, oh, cool, there's going to be a lot of desserts, you know, not, oh, I get to talk to so-and-so, I haven't seen them in so long, how great, you know, which most normal people I think would think of. I was like, oh, great, there's going to be tons of desserts, awesome, you know, like.
But I thought that was really brave to share that. And I think people reading that will take a lot of comfort, because obviously I'm privy to a lot of people's secrets. That's my job. And I hear people talking about doing the very similar things to what you talk about in your book, and the shame like around it, around taking food that doesn't belong to you, around hiding food, and the sort of the deceptiveness about it. It doesn't feel okay, but also that desire to not want to look at ourselves too closely because it's just too painful, right?
Yeah, it was, I couldn't even explain why even I was doing it. Just food had this crazy like power over me and control over me. I couldn't tell you. I mean, yes, I loved, you know, I gravitated towards sweets predominantly, but of course I ate other unhealthy things. So I wasn't gorging myself on, you know, carrots and lettuce, you know, and cucumbers. You know, it was definitely junk food and high caloric, fatty, you know, type things, or, you know, super high in carbohydrates and so forth. I didn't even know what it was. It was just this thing driving me that, food was just so all encompassing. And like you had mentioned, like the dialogue, you know, kind of in my head, oh my gosh, you know, when can I go get this? And how can I go get that? And who's going to see me? And what, you know, what am I going to say? And how can I hide it? It was just, everything was just, my life was just like food driven. And I didn't know why. And it was just my secret. It certainly wasn't anything I was going to talk to anybody about. I never heard anybody else talking about it. And yeah, it was shameful and it was embarrassing to feel that way, but I would never say anything to anybody about it because it was just, I thought it was just me. You know, I thought, who could possibly understand this? This is just me and this is how I am.
Mm-hmm. And so for 30 years of living like this, being just you, there was a moment, didn't you? You had that moment. Do you want to tell us about what happened?
Yeah. Well, I was home one night. I was in one horrible relationship. Guy that I married, I was with him off and on for 8 years. Left him, divorced him, thank goodness. So I'm happily married, and I had 2 wonderful, healthy children. And this was like 12 years ago. So my kids were little, and my husband was out, I think like watching sports somewhere, and the kids were sleeping. I was watching TV and just, you know, regular old night. And someone on the television said compulsive overeating. And at that moment in time, you know, and I maybe would have heard those words 5 years prior and it would have went right over my head. But for some reason, this time when I heard it, it was like, it sort of just struck a chord. So I went into the room and my laptop and I started Googling, and it came up to, I'm sure there were other websites, but Overeaters Anonymous was the biggest one that came up. And at that time, very prominent on the site said, "Are you one of us?" And I was like, okay. And it was, all these questions. Do you eat in secret? Do you eat when you're not hungry? Do you feel shame? And it was all these questions. And I was like, yes, 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 yes. And it was like, oh my God. That was hugely emotional. I was shocked. I was shocked, first of all, that there was a website and it was about this topic. I remember just being blown away how there's a website about, like, this is so known that there's a website for this, of what I'm doing. I couldn't believe it. And then I started really reading, and I found out that it was a mental illness. And that was like, oh my God, like, this is serious. This is for real. This is a real, true problem that other people have. And it's a mental illness, which has its own unfortunate stigma and shame associated with it. And I was like, I have the disease. I have an addiction. Oh my God. So on the one thing, it was just all these crazy emotions of this discovery. But then also was this like glimmer of hope, I think, like, there's a name for this and I can stop doing this. So I just remember crying and crying and crying, just because, again, all this myriad of emotions. Immediately that night, sitting there, I typed, because I've been a writer for decades at that point. I typed out a letter to my husband, taking him through exactly what I was going through at that time. I just Googled this, and oh my goodness, this is what's wrong. And, I waited up for him, and I showed, I walked in, he saw I was all, all snotty and crying. And he was like, "Oh my gosh, are you okay? What's wrong?" And I was like, "Just read this letter," and he was like, "Are you okay?" And, I'm like, "Please just read it." So he put one arm around me and then had one arm holding the papers. And I thought for sure he was going to read it and then be like, "Okay, well, we had a good run. I'm going to take the kids and we're getting out of here. You've got way too many problems, and, I'm taking the kids and good luck." But he just hugged me closer and, told me he loved me and that he would help me. So even though, of course, that made me cry more, that he, wasn't going to drop me like a hot potato, and which is what I thought I deserved, having these problems. So that was a hugely emotional night for me. And that was the catalyst to me starting my road to recovery.
But it felt like an enormous risk for you to tell your husband, like, in your mind, this was such a terrible, shameful, I'm broken. I don't want to put words into your mouth, but like, I'm broken totally. Kind of response. You're not going to want to be with me anymore.
Yeah, totally. I was damaged goods. I had all this baggage. Who wants to deal with this,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so then your first part of your recovery was finding OA. Is that right? And you started going to meetings, didn't you?
Yeah, I started, I immediately dug in. I already ordered some books on overeating and recovery. That night, I ordered an OA book. I started looking up meetings, and I started looking into therapy. But the first thing I probably really and truly, concretely did was, was to start going to OA. And, they say, I don't know if this is still the rule, but it was, try 5 meetings and, try to find the one that feels the best for you. And the first 3 that I went to were in kind of big rooms, and there was a lot of people, and I didn't feel comfortable. I didn't feel that warmth that I was comfort level, and that safety and that warmth that I was kind of looking for. But I knew, keep trying. And fortunately, much to my surprise, OA meetings are like everywhere, like that church that you pass by thousands, every single week. there's one in the basement. Like there's 2 meetings here a week, and you're like, oh my God, there's meetings. It's so close to my house, or just like this school or this whatever. They were everywhere. They were really close to my house, and I was like shocked at that. So the 4th meeting that I went to was in like a smaller room, and there were less people, and I was definitely getting warmer, and all the meetings are different, and some of them read the big book, and some of them do step meetings, and there's just different types of meetings. And I remember at this one, at the end, everybody shared, and I remember relating to people for the first time. I don't know that people shared so much in the first meetings, or it was just so big and overwhelming. It didn't strike me. It didn't strike any chords. But this meeting, I started to like hear people, and their stories resonated. And I remember at the end of the meeting, the leader had us all get up and join hands and recite a prayer and of like welcome home. And I sort of stood back at first because I wasn't a part of the meeting. I was just observing, and that was like my mindset. I'm just sort of observing, and the people on the 2 sides of me reached their hands out to pull me into the circle, which got me, and they recited something, and it said, welcome to OA, welcome home. And I was like, oh my God, I am home. These are my people. This is where I belong. I am home. Because, nobody else gets this, right? Only people who have the eating disorder. And I did go to one more meeting because there's just one more that was nearby to try. And that one was even just a little bit smaller, and that was it. I was like, I found it. This is the one. And I knew that I was home. That is truly what it felt like. Because my home with my parents wasn't that home feeling, this is home. And then they didn't even know me, and I didn't know any of them, but just to have that feeling of understanding, that mutual understanding. All these people here are obsessed with food. It was, unfortunately, I didn't want anybody to feel the way that I did, but just, knowing that I didn't even know them yet. We all understood each other on this level. It was really comforting.
Mm-hmm. So for the longest time, you've been on your own head in this. This has all been secret for 30 years. And then now you're with people and they get it.
Yeah.
So like that, I think, I'm shocked because I went to OA for about 7 months. And for me, that was the biggest takeaway, was the people were just so kind and so loving, and they got it. And it was the first time that I could talk to people that got it. And I think it really worked on the shame for me. But a little bit like you, I didn't subscribe to I kept trying to do the steps. Don't get me wrong. I felt like I was giving it a good go. But I felt like with the program itself, I wasn't getting anywhere. And you took some of it and left other parts, didn't you?
I did. And that's one of the nice things about OA is I think they say, take what you want and leave the rest. And for me, just step one, admitting you were powerless over food and that your life had become unmanageable. That was just such a big thing for me. And just for me personally, and there's tons of people who swear by OA and working the steps. I felt I want to go to a therapist. That sort of sat better with me, and just me personally. I'm not knocking the steps at all. That it just didn't feel right for me. So it was therapy that really helped me work through where this disorder came from.
Yeah. And when I got to the point in your book where you were going to OA, like my heart sank a little bit, and I was like, oh, it's going to be another book where they've given up sugar and flour and it's an addiction and you just can't have any of these foods anymore. And I was like, oh, I think this is where we're going to verge in our opinions. And I was pleasantly surprised that isn't what happened. So what I found really interesting was your interpretation of abstinence. So maybe you could say a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, what's really nice is I think OA has evolved over the years, where they were, right, exactly what you said. You're giving up flour and sugar and that's it. And if you have one bite, you're done and you've lost your abstinence and you've got to, start over again. But they changed it over the years to, oh gosh, I don't remember the wording, but it was like what abstinence means to you personally. And for me, it was, I could eat whatever I wanted. And of course, I tried not to eat certain things because I knew that, once I ate a chocolate chip cookie, I couldn't eat one. So I did certainly cut things out at the beginning because I knew I wouldn't be able to control myself. But I made sure, one of the things I learned early on was just deprivation. And when you're deprived, that's what leads you to binging. So I allowed myself 5 Hershey's Kisses every day. That's what I ate for my dessert after dinner. So I never was deprived because I knew I was getting it. And what I did eat during the day, what was on my food plan, were things that I liked. I wasn't like choking down a rice cake or, a piece of lettuce or things, I was very into nutrition. And I would certainly look for things, and I wasn't eating high fat things, but I also wasn't, eating like a rabbit. I was trying to find, okay, well, what can I eat that is healthy for me and that tastes good? Because I knew if I was going to be deprived, that it just wouldn't be sustainable. So I absolutely did not. So cutting out a food group was not, that never even got on my radar because I knew that wasn't going to work for me personally. There was nothing cut out. It was for me, and again, I can get into this another time, but going to therapy was what helped me to learn about my childhood and what went on and being able to process it and, kind of wrap my arms around that whole situation. I didn't need food anymore, like in that manner. I didn't need to use food anymore. I didn't have that compulsive need to stuff my face for, no reason. I understood, you were eating that because you felt the desire to stuff your face because of all this trauma from your childhood that you never even knew existed. So I dealt with it. With the help of a therapist, I helped heal the little girl inside me. And then I didn't need to turn the food. I could eat food in moderation. I could have, a brownie and be like, well, that was good. Okay, whatever, and it just, the food, I didn't require, stuffing my face with food anymore. That part of my life, was dealt with, I suppose. That was humongous for me. And I'm not sure, did I answer your question?
Yeah. Do you still have urges to compulsively eat now?
No. I mean, sometimes I might go grab something to eat. For the most part, I do try to eat intuitively and I listen to my body and am I hungry? Am I not hungry? But sometimes too, I do just eat to eat because I feel like it. You know what? That sounds good right now. But do I sit there and, all of a sudden what used to happen, what I described in the book was it felt like a switch turned on. And I went from being like doing, working or, doing whatever. And then all of a sudden it was like, must eat, must stuff face right now, and it was just, anything and everything just was fair game and was going in my mouth. And, I think I described in the book, I would open up the pantry and scan around and, be like, yeah, nothing's appealing to me right now. And I close the door and then I'd be in the refrigerator and then I'd be going back to the pantry thinking something magically showed up that would really taste good. But then at that point, my standards were low and I'd be like, all right, well, there's nothing chocolate in here or nothing salty in here, but okay, I guess those crackers are going to be it. So I would, get out the crack, eat a sleeve of crackers, just because I had to put something in my mouth. So it was just so nice to be kind of relieved of that. Do I overeat sometimes? Of course I do, just like everybody else does, right? The difference for me, and this I think goes back to your other question. Abstinence for me was not to be able to eat a food that I like, I'll call it maybe a trigger food, and then not go, screw it, I ate it, and now I'm going to eat everything that's not nailed down, right? Because we all have that mentality when you're eating disorder, like, oh, I blew it, so now I'm going to go to town. So I apologize, this is what I should have probably answered before was, I didn't have that mentality anymore. For me, abstinence meant being able to eat, maybe in some instance going to an event or a wedding or something, and eating more food than I would normally have, and then going right back to my regular course of eating. If I ever ate too much in an event, like I said, like at a wedding, who at home eats, like has hors d'oeuvres and then has their, like your palate cleanser and then your main dish. And you know what I mean? And there's bread and there's this and there's, you don't eat like that normal. It's a special occasion. So you go, all right, I'm going to eat a little more than I normally would. So to be able to eat more than normal and then just be, quote unquote, normal again, not be, screw it, I messed up and now I'm off to the races and I'm off the wagon and back down that rabbit hole of binging again. I could just stop. And it was, like I said, like somebody normal, quote unquote, a normal eater who could overeat one day, for one meal, and it's fine. They don't beat themselves up. It's not this whole mental thing and, going on, and just go back to your normal eating. And it was no big deal. So that was abstinence to me. And that's what the difference was for me.
Yeah. So that moment though, you're talking about, that moment where you just kind of go, screw it. They sometimes call it hitting the F it button. I don't know if you elaborate, right?
Yeah.
That is so derailing, like over and over again. How did you stop your brain from doing that? Because that just becomes such an automatic thing for so many people. Like they know, I'll talk about it and they'll go, oh my goodness, yes, that's me. But how do I stop it from happening? It's like we forget and get pulled back into it. I don't know what your thoughts are on that. There's probably not an easy answer, but what was it for you?
And you're right. That was totally all the time. I mean, how many times were you like, all right, I'm just going to start being good tomorrow. This was the last time I'm binging tomorrow, or it would be Monday, or, whatever thing you set up in your head. And then you'd mess up again. And, just this vicious cycle, right, of promising yourself, you could get angry at yourself. You promise you're not going to do it again. And then you do it. It's this terrible, just terrible cycle. I think what I was saying before was the difference is that learning what the reason was behind all that. And that was in therapy, and learning that my mom hiding the cookies from me was her unknowingly giving me the message that you're not worthy, you're not enough, you're not, you don't deserve this. So she sent me all those messages, and the therapist helped me learn that, first of all, that's the reason why, right, that I turned to eating, that and just the lack of cherishing and love. And she helped me to heal that. So the little girl inside me who felt all those things that I carried with me, right, far into adulthood till I was almost 40, I was still using that coping mechanism for that lack of, I love that I loved your word cherishing, the lack of cherishing that I felt, that coping mechanism that I put into place, which was food. And right, it could have been drugs, it could have been alcohol, it could have been sex, it could have been gambling. I had all these things to choose from, but I chose food to be my coping or defense mechanism. I just carried it because I didn't know I had this trauma in my childhood, right, of being treated like that. So I just carried it into adulthood, and I just kept binging and compulsively overeating for, like you said, 30 years. So once we dug deep, really peeled back the layers of the onion, so to speak, is learned about what happened. And like I said, was able to process it, understand it. And just, it didn't happen in a second. It was months and months and many appointments. So it was a lot of time, and a lot of thinking, and a lot of, letting things marinate kind of, and learning to understand that my parents, my mother, they didn't do anything on purpose, and that there wasn't anything wrong with me, because I always thought that I'm less than. And I still struggle with that a little bit today, that I'm less than, or I'm not worthy of, this happened to me. Well, I'm really not worthy of it. So I still feel that a little tiny bit, but mostly that's all been healed. So the desire to eat, to compulsive food, that driving force, that unnameable driving force inside me that was demanding me to stuff my face, it's not there anymore. It's maybe, like this big. And, I used to kind of say I had like an angel and a devil on my shoulder, and the devil would be like, eat, and the angel would be like, well, maybe that's not a good idea. But, the angel would be that big and the devil would be huge, and the devil always won. But now the angel's really big and the devil's, microscopic. So it doesn't occur to me to do that anymore. And still, even to this day, I will, my husband and I will leave an event. Like I said, we keep using wedding, but just say a wedding, and I'll drive home. I'll be like, oh my God, I talked all night long to so-and-so and so-and-so. I didn't even go over and see what was at the dessert table, which is like such a silly thing to say, right? Like who thinks of things in terms like that? But it still amazes me. I'm still so thrilled. I don't take for granted that I don't have that pull, that the food just doesn't have the power over me and the control over me anymore like it used to. Mm-hmm. And I really think, like I said, it was from dealing with this childhood crap that I went through thoroughly. It was me being completely honest about it. Everything that had happened and all my feelings, so that the therapist can then help me. Because if you're not completely honest, then I don't think you can, this is my opinion, I don't know that you can recover all the way. You have to really lay it all out there and be completely authentic and honest and real, and then the therapist can then help you.
Yeah. And it's really difficult, I think, to be honest, and to even be honest with ourselves, let alone with someone else, when it comes to our upbringing. Because there's that child part actually sometimes that wants to defend the parent, and it can be seen like either an attack or a defense, as opposed to let's try and understand and make sense of this. But I also think, so I find a lot of people will say, well, I know where it comes from. I know what happened in my childhood. And knowing about it and talking about it, I don't see how that would help. But there was a moment in your book that I thought was really powerful in that aspect. And that was when your therapist led you on the visualization through the forest to talk to your inner child. That's what really seemed to energetically shift something. Do you want to just share a little bit about that experience for you? Because that bit really caught my attention.
Yeah, that was huge. And that's actually one of the things that when I was writing it, and then when I would be reading it, that would still bring tears to my eyes. That was just such a big breakthrough for me. What the therapist did, and of course I had no idea what she was doing or what was going on. She had me get very comfortable on the couch and just, get all cozy. And she had me as adult me walk down a path, and she's just set the scene that it's just the perfect temperature and everything's wonderful, and quiet and peaceful. And you come upon this little girl, she's sitting at the base of a tree, and it's you, when you were, 9 years old. What are you going to go say to yourself? And, I sat thinking for a moment, because nobody had ever asked me that before. I was like, sort of took me by surprise. And I thought about it for a second. And then I told this little Ronni how loved she was, and how you're beautiful and you're smart and you're kind and you can do anything you want in this world. And you mean the world to me, and you're so precious. And, all these things that I never heard, but unknowingly, I desperately needed to have heard back then. I didn't know it, and it just came pouring out of me. And I was just holding, my younger self and rubbing my back and saying all these things. And I didn't even realize how much I was crying. And she just let me go and have that moment. And, she just slowly pulled me out of it when she thought it was done. And I opened my eyes and she put a tissue box next to me, which, I needed a lot of tissues at that point. And it was just huge, huge.
Yeah. Wow. So one thing I always ask everybody who comes and tells their story, and I'm really interested to hear where you take this, because when you were recovering, you started a blog and you were engaging a lot with other people who were struggling and sort of supporting other people along the way. And so if someone watching this they're struggling with compulsive eating or binge eating, they're stuck in that whirring cycle, they know what it is because they probably wouldn't be watching this if they weren't relating already. Like, where would you suggest people start?
Well, first of all, like you said, if they're watching you, they've already started, right? And they're already finding that they're not alone and other people feel the same. And hopefully that brings I think it brings some healing to know that you're not alone, because you really do feel like you're alone. But I would recommend going to some OA meetings. It's one thing to hear somebody, in a podcast or a YouTube channel who's saying that, but actually sitting in a room full of people who really get you is pretty amazing. And these people are, men and women, all shapes and sizes, all ages, all different economic status or economic status, excuse me. So it really affects everybody, right? There's not just one, little group of people. So it's just, you don't want to say like misery loves company, but it's just nice to know that you're not alone. And so to physically be with people, and you don't have to be embarrassed because whatever you've done, they've done that or worse, right? We all get it. So that would be one thing, is to highly recommend OA meetings. Now, I realize in the pandemic that sitting in a meeting is maybe, depending on where you live, isn't happening, but there's phone meetings too, all the time, everywhere. And even though you're not physically sitting with people, there's a ton of people who you can talk to and listen to and gain hope from their stories. So that would be one thing. But I would really, really, really strongly recommend therapy. I think I probably blabbed too much about that already, but I can't speak about it highly enough. And it's my understanding that very few people recover without professional help. And that you really, as much as you can say, you know what, yeah, just for instance, not to give him a bad rap, my stepfather used to beat me, so that's why I'm turning to food. Well, that's great that you recognize that, but you need somebody, a professional, to help guide you through those feelings and to just, like I said, help you process it all. I think that's really the key. And also too, to read some, again, reading books, that was huge for me too. I read a lot of books that, you read and you're like, oh my gosh, that's me. Or, oh, they did that. That sounds like a great idea. Or just to give hope, to know that they recovered and I did that too, and I can recover too,
That's great. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us, Ronni, and for everything you've shared. It's much appreciated. And I'll pop a link below to the book. And if people want to follow you on Instagram, what's your Instagram handle? Your name?
Ronni Robb Writes.
Ronni Robb Writes. And she does. She writes very well.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks. You so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye, Sarah.
Don't actually go.
Okay.
That's just for that. Brilliant. Thank you so much. I'm just going to stop. I forgot to look at the time when we started. So